All right, this is our unit. It's the Global Health Summit Integrated Curriculum Unit on HIV and AIDS.
To begin, we'll talk about the role of the English teacher in this unit. So basically, the job of the English teacher here is to try to give some kind of moral fiber and backbone to it. So the other teachers are talking a lot about the science behind it, or actually the geography or the history behind it. What we're going to try to do is give them more perspective and encourage critical thinking. So we're going to try to give a more human aspect to it. So when they discuss individuals who've been afflicted with AIDS, we're going to look at firsthand accounts of that. Then the ethical implications of a vaccine trial, as well as in terms of the funneling of money. We're going to try to look at what would be the most ethical and practical way of doing so. And also help with the summative presentation to give them some kind of structure there. And when you look at all of these different things that the English teacher's doing this lesson, I would say, again, the takeaway here is that our job is to foster a deeper understanding of what's going on beyond the surface level. We're going to go deeper and once they know the facts, help them have a more complete understanding of this is affecting real people. This isn't just something you read in a textbook. And that's really what English language arts can do. It can help people understand that these are real people and real problems that are afflicting our world, and help students try to understand that even though they may not personally encounter people who are stricken by HIV or AIDS, or never go to Africa to see how it's destroying the country, we can try to provide firsthand accounts that can give them that kind of emotional pull and make it feel more real.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to cover how we might implement ELA instruction specifically in this unit. And so obviously in the English units or lessons, there's countless opportunities to implement ELA instruction. We have several essays, long and short essays that are assigned in different subunits. There's also lots of informative readings that are assigned, and close reading activities and exercises that can be implemented in order for their success in filling out different graphic organizers and worksheets, so that are eventually turned in for assessment. And what's awesome is because worksheets and graphic organizers are assigned not just in ELA or in the English classes, also in the biology and the health classes that are involved in this unit, those same literary close reading activities can be applied outside of the English classroom as well. So specifically, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so specifically, the final writing assignment is a 500-word essay, and it's specifically about the PEPFAR and ethics in vaccines. So it kind of plays into what Brandon was talking about in terms of implementing ethics and getting students to kind of look at the moral issues, but at the same time, we're focusing on ELA instruction. We're doing background information, close reading activities, and then walking students through the writing process to see that they're successfully developing their literacy skills.
Good. Okay, so walking through the entire lesson, we have 3 subunits. The first subunit is pretty much talking about how it's a serious situation. So we have our English lesson where we read personal narratives. The teacher first talks about what do you know about AIDS, or what have you heard, and they read personal accounts and then have another class discussion. And then we have a biology lesson for lesson 1.2, and this is where we talk about the actual virus, the HIV virus, obviously, and we look at the infections and how it's progressed, and the role of the student is to look at the life cycle of HIV and to see where in the cycle can we stop it or halt it or adjust it in any way. And then we have our world geography lesson. This is a lot of maps, and you look at the countries and you label. There's also looking at where AIDS is affecting us in the world and its impact. We'll look at the global and social and economic impact, and students actually present on, it's called an epidemic status report from each country, and they give one, I think, like every year or something. And so students read a summary from a specific country and then give that as a presentation. For subunit 2, we have treating the problem. So this is when we go into more health stuff like the paths of transmission and the myths about how you could get HIV and how it's transmitted. So for health, this is also talking about risky behaviors, kind of like sex ed stuff, and the transmission of viruses and diseases and stuff. So then we also have the biology lesson where we investigate and we look at the science of the drugs that they use, called antiviral drug. And that's the treatment, but because HIV is, so tricky, let's just call it, they just take a cocktail of antiviral drugs and kind of like hope that it works, but this can also make it ineffective for some people. So they say that, they talk about in the lesson how there's only 3 outcomes. Either it's just completely ineffective, or it'll like slow the process down, or it will not prevent infection or the disease. So not very good outcomes no matter what if you already have the virus. And then the last lesson for the subunit 2 is it can be English or health. And this is where we go into the ethics and what Brandon was talking about, where we examine the ethics and analyze and talk about like the funding and how, I think that's in lesson 3, but the funding and how the developed countries are donating to the underdeveloped countries. So then, so subunit 3 is finding the right solution, and this is where our summative assessment comes in. And we have the students, their end goal is to write a report and pretty much create their own program. But first by researching current programs on HIV and AIDS and like donations and organizations. And then they are to consider like the role of economics and social and global, and then they give a presentation on their written reports and like create a pamphlet, and the whole goal is to their understanding of HIV and AIDS, to show their understanding and to present maybe a solution.
Perfect. So going off of what she ended on, the culminating event, so they're going to be discussing solutions to the AIDS pandemic, especially in the developing world. And the students are going to be writing a report on the background information they have on the current HIV and AIDS situation to their assigned countries. So the ones that they suggest are Brazil, Cuba, India, Kenya, Nigeria, the Russian Federation, South Africa, and Thailand, just because they have a lot of information available on them. And at the end of the unit, they will be creating a PowerPoint and sharing their proposals to their classmates, as well as making the pamphlet. So the essential key question for the entire unit is, what is the responsibility of the United States to address the health crises in the developing world? And then through ELA, biology, health science, and world geography, they all have their own separate questions that were addressed already, like health science, like the ways that it's spread, biology, how does it infect the body, what's the difference between HIV and AIDS, world geography, how widespread is the AIDS pandemic around the world. So a learning scenario that they give is that the students are trying to travel with their cousin to South Africa. And in order to do that, their parents have 2 requests. The first one, they're concerned about the HIV rates, so they want to make sure that the child knows how HIV is transmitted and knowing that they're not going to be putting themselves at risk. And then 2, your parents want you to volunteer or donate to an AIDS organization of your liking. So the students have to then write about how AIDS is spread and show that they know how it is, and then show that they did research on an organization. And then she went over the subunits for us already.
So this is a complex unit, not only because it's interdisciplinary in nature, but also because it relies on developing empathy and an ethical compass. So those elements really, paired with how relevant this issue is to our students, is what makes it such a meaningful unit. So in the first subunit, the personal toll, looking at the personal narratives is what helps develop our students' empathy. They also learn how huge of an issue the pandemic currently is. Infection rates are actually on the rise, and it's important that our students know that. Subunit 2, treating the problem, is where the students explore the paths of transmission for HIV and AIDS. Obviously, this is extremely relevant to teenagers, as they need to understand the possible risks of engaging in unprotected sex, as well as other pathways of transmission. Students also develop an understanding of HIV treatment options, which is again relevant for teenagers, but also relevant for students that are considering medical profession later on in their career. Also in subunit 2, the vaccine trials and the potential ethical dilemmas that are involved, which have been mentioned a couple times, but essentially, what does informed consent look like, which is an important life skill, not only in this unit, but in general. Subunit 3, finding the right solution, rich countries, poor victims, and the global response to AIDS. This is also how we're going to build more empathy through our students. They're also going to develop an understanding of distribution of funds, which can also be relevant for future business career paths. But essentially, this is like the culmination of all 3 units and these skill sets that we've been building to help them develop the autonomy needed to answer the essential question of the unit, which is, what is the responsibility of the U.S. to address health crises in the developing world? So these skill sets really can be carried throughout college or career, whatever path our students choose to take, which is what makes it so relevant and so meaningful.
Wonderful.
Great job.
Perfect.
Wow, we nailed it.
Good.